The CoinDesk Spotlight is brought to you by Nexo, the place to earn on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and more.
Diamond Hands, the pseudonymous founder of controversial social media site BitClout, is now naming the blockchain the app runs on. It's called DeSo, or Decentralized Social, a blockchain that's already raised $200 million in financing from the likes of Andreessen Horowitz, Coinbase Ventures, Sequoia, and others. Well, now Diamond Hands has revealed his identity, and he joins us now. Welcome, Nader Al-Naji, founder of BitClout and now DeSo. So, Nader, BitClout is trying to put social media on the blockchain. The app launched in March, and users can issue their own creator coin, which other users can buy into. And the more that people like your content, the more valuable your coin will become, in theory. And it's an interesting concept, but the rollout was highly criticized. So are you essentially rebranding BitClout as DeSo to start anew and shed the bad associations?
Well, thank you, Christine, for having me on the show. Just as context for your viewers, the DeSo is the first blockchain that's custom built from the ground up to scale social applications to over 1 billion users. And it currently supports over 100 apps that have been built on it in the last 6 months, which is just incredible and unprecedented developer traction. BitClout, the app that you're talking about, is kind of a prototype app that we launched, and I actually launched it pseudonymously as Diamond Hands. But it's one of over 100 now, and there are a lot that are launching soon. And in fact, there was so much developer traction with so many apps being built on it so early that we actually decided to launch a formal developer fund. And it's actually a $50 million fund called the Octane Fund that we're launching today. And the exciting thing about that is it presents a completely new model for building out social media. For example, just yesterday, we saw with the Facebook outage how heavily we've come to rely on a single entity for our information needs. Really until now, there's only been one way to build social media apps, namely with central planning. So essentially a large private company that controls the content. And we think that instead of central planning, you can have the content be a utility rather than a privately held monopoly. And you can have thousands of apps built by thousands of developers all on an open pool of content. And that's what we hope to enable with DeSo, the blockchain, and now the Octane Fund, this $50 million fund that we're announcing today.
So Diamond Hands, when you launched Clout, though, there were a bunch of basically fake celebrity profiles that were created without their consent. Now, is that necessarily what decentralization is? I mean, if I go on and there were people who were going on there and saying, wait, why is my profile up there? Why is it being bid on and I have no control over it? How does that, how many, first of all, the other question is, how many profiles do you have like that that were created for other people without them knowing about it, without them consenting to it? Is that really what's going on here? Is that really what a decentralized platform will look like?
Well, what you're referring to is when BitClout launched, it had actually reserved profiles for the top 15,000 users from Twitter
who loaded
onto the blockchain beforehand. And the reason for that was really to prevent squatting and impersonation of those profiles. But just to go back to your broader question, I think today we live in a world where social media is on a highly centralized part of a spectrum. So if you think of a spectrum of total centralization on one end and total anarchy on the other, we're on the totally centralized part of the spectrum. There's 3 companies that control the vast majority of the information that we see today. But just to be very clear, we think the other end of total anarchy is also untenable. There's a lot of content that actually is harmful that you do want to screen out and things like that. And so with DeSo, the blockchain, what we think the right model for content is, having thought about it for over 2 years myself, is something more in the middle. And so the blockchain, the DeSo blockchain, contains all of the content that powers all of the apps built on top of it, like BitClout. But it's up to those apps to make decisions about moderation and what content should and shouldn't be shown. And to your point about reserved profiles, that was a decision that we made with the BitClout app, but it doesn't apply to other apps. So for example, a lot of apps only show profiles that have actually been claimed or that are even more stringently verified and things like that. And they do that because that's how they maximize usage and adoption.
But, listen, you get somebody who's like a D-list celebrity like myself. We don't necessarily have a BitClout profile on there. We don't have another app profile on there now. But you go on and then you're like, okay, I want to, if somebody might potentially squat on it, right, and you haven't reserved it, then what's my recourse?
Yeah, I mean, so up first, I'd give yourself a little more credit than that.
All right,
D-list is pretty
C-list,
low,
sure.
but yeah. But no, so if there's, again, we reserve profiles for the top 15,000 people from Twitter and loaded those onto the blockchain. But if you don't have a profile, you can create one, and you can have the same benefits as, like create a coin associated with your profile when you post. And again, maybe just to go back, because DeSo is a blockchain, it offers all kinds of features that you could never really do in a centralized fashion. And we call them investment native or money native features. And so the big feature you're referring to is having a coin associated with your profile that all other users can buy and sell, and you earn fees off of that. Many users, I think many dozens of users, have earned hundreds of thousands of dollars just on the fees associated with their profile and the coin associated with their profile alone. But there are many other features. So, for example, NFTs are native to the DeSo blockchain. People have made hundreds of thousands of dollars on that. There's actually a Clout Punk NFT series that I believe has made over $400,000 just from that. And then, of course, there's diamonds, which are very, very popular. And so when you make a post on a DeSo app like BitClout, you can actually get tips associated with the post called diamonds. And that's anywhere from a penny to $1,000. And people make hundreds to thousands of dollars a week just from the diamonds feature alone. And so what you're seeing is all of this money-enabled or investment-enabled product that's being created, BitClout being an early prototype. And so even for you as someone who doesn't have a reserved profile, you can make much, much more than what you would ever make on another social network, which is probably zero. By the way, it's zero even if you're an A-list celebrity on another network.
So I just want to kind of bring up a larger philosophical question, kind of going off of what Lawrence just said. So, on the one hand, you would think that the timing for this is perfect because, Facebook is in another scandal. There's so much controversy over Twitter and Trump, for example. But, the problem is that everybody complains social media platform too much power, but then when something goes wrong, they do want the social media platforms to come in and fix it, right? So, this idea of like a totally decentralized social media is problematic in the sense that like what happens when people are posting, fake news, slander, hate speech, it just stays there forever. And, if you look at Twitter, I think a lot of people actually support, for better or worse, Twitter taking down Trump's account. People wanted Twitter to do that. So how do you deal with those issues where you have, market forces creating content that some people really don't think should be up?
It's a great question. So I've spent over 2 years working on this technology, and moderation, which is what you're referring to, is probably the thing that I've thought the most about and how we solve that problem and make it better than it is today. And so when you look at today and you look at the fact that these private companies essentially control all of the content, there's actually a lot of disadvantages to that, which is that we basically rely solely on them to watch, for example, the spread of misinformation, to use machine learning to label harmful content. And they're not really aligned to do that, right? They're aligned to make money on ads, which often they make more money spreading misinformation than from actually finding it and killing it, right? Which is literally what we saw with all the recent elections. And so what you find is that when you actually put all the content on an open blockchain, suddenly the entire world can be involved in moderating the content and also analyzing the content. So, for example, you can have the best machine learning researchers in the world building models to find harmful content, which is something that you can't do today when it's all closed. And on top of that, you can even have watch the spread of misinformation much, much more closely than you can today. For example, even the federal government could be involved in watching how misinformation is spreading throughout the network when it's open. And it all comes back to content being a utility rather than a privately controlled monopoly. And when content is a utility, we really believe that all of the benefits that you get from using the entire world's ingenuity to moderate it outweigh the negatives of it being more open, if that makes sense.
Diamond Hands, you said you raised about $200 million in cash, right? Or $200 million. Was that in cash or was that through coin? How did you raise that money, the $200 million? And how much of that, how much of the $50 million that you're now using as an investment fund came from that $200 million?
It's a great question. So DeSo essentially is a project that I've been working on since early 2019. I actually worked on it without telling anybody for almost 2 years. And so in late 2020, we formally launched the blockchain. It was running on a few dozen nodes. And the blockchain had a feature where essentially you could send Bitcoin to a treasury wallet and get DeSo coins as a result. And so that's really the same mechanism. That's the mechanism that all the big venture capitalists that Christine mentioned went through. It's also the same mechanism that all ordinary people went through to buy DeSo. So there were over 44,000 purchases through that mechanism. And so that is Bitcoin in a treasury wallet. And now we have a formal and public structure around it via the DeSo Foundation, which uses that capital to grow the decentralized social ecosystem. And the first really major act for the DeSo Foundation is the creation of this $50 million Octane fund, and it will use the proceeds from that treasury to fund that.
So how much of that actually of that 200 million actually came from venture capital? Like how much of the Bitcoin that you guys received in your wallet, how much of that was from let's say Andreessen Horowitz? How much did they actually contribute versus the masses?
Yeah, so the awesome thing about the blockchain is that you don't have to ask me, in order to essentially get hold of DeSo, and that's why we were able to even have so many people involved, over 44,000 purchases. That said, I did speak with a few of the people who put money into the protocol, and so I would estimate that it's maybe under 40 million, that actually came from VCs, and the rest is actually people like you and me.
Mm-hmm. And the native cryptocurrency Clout powers the DeSo blockchain. Did your investors receive tokens for money in expectation of a profit?
Well, so the token's actually called DeSo. There's the DeSo blockchain, and then there's the DeSo coin, which you can buy on blockchain.com or Ascendex, which are two crypto exchanges that list it, with a really big listing coming soon. And so, really, our philosophy, you'll have to talk to the lawyers for the expectation of profit and things like that. But the network was fully launched before anybody put any money in. And so, the way we think about it is in the same way that you might use your CPU power to mine and get Bitcoin, which you can do even today. Instead of burning CPU, you burn Bitcoin to get DeSo. And so there's an analog there that I think we're comfortable with.
Is there any concern that's a security?
Well, the SEC, has to weigh in on, actual guidance on what is and isn't a security, of course, and you have to talk to the lawyers about that. But I will say we work with the best law firms in the entire world. And additionally, many people don't know, for my last company called Basis, I actually raised $140 million for that company. And when it turned out that we couldn't do things in a compliant fashion, I actually returned the money rather than do something that would be regulatorily risky or on the edge. And so, with DeSo, we did it from the ground up. Again, we have the best counsel, we have memos and opinions and all that stuff. So, I'm very comfortable with everything that we're doing.
Super